Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku could split himself into three: heart, brain, and body, but each has a mind of its own. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sky above Muzutafu was an unnervingly peaceful shade of blue, a stark, mocking contrast to the symphony of chaos erupting in the Kiashi Ward shopping district. Smoke, thick and acrid, coiled into the air like grasping fingers, born from fires that chewed greedily on overturned cars and shattered storefronts. The screams of terrified civilians were a percussive, desperate rhythm beneath the baritone groan of stressed metal and the sharp, cracking retort of crumbling concrete. This was not the work of a simple brute. This was curated pandemonium. At the epicenter of it all was a villain who called himself Chimera. His quirk, as far as the heroes on the scene could determine, was a terrifying form of projection called aspect manifestation. He didn't just fight. He fractured his own psyche into tangible, semi-corporeal threats. His greed was a swirling, shadowy beast with dozens of slick, thieving hands, currently looting every jewelry store and cash register in a 2-block radius. His paranoia was a skittering, insect-like creature of pure anxiety, planting sophisticated, shimmering energy bombs on support structures with unnerving speed and precision. And his rage, the most prominent of the three, was a hulking, crimson beast of raw power that engaged any hero who got too close, a mindless engine of destruction. Chimera himself, a man with a cruel smirk and eyes that gleamed with manic intelligence, stood atop a public fountain, conducting his orchestra of mayhem like a mad maestro. "Come now, heroes!" he bellowed, his voice echoing unnaturally over the din. "A person is a multitude of things. Surely you can multitask. Or are you also one note?" Class 1A, on a work-study patrol with their supervising heroes, had been the first to respond. Now they were scattered, stretched thin, and fighting a losing battle. "I can't get a solid hit on it," Kirishima yelled, his hardened arms clanging uselessly against the rage aspect. The creature was like violent smoke. His fists passed through it, only for it to solidify an instant later and slam him into the pavement. "There are too many bombs!" Yayorozu cried out, her hands a blur as she created insulated shears and electromagnetic pulse devices. But for every one she and Jiro managed to neutralize, the paranoia aspect would scuttle up a wall and plant 3 more. Uraraka and Ida were a frantic blur of motion, evacuating civilians. "This way! Quickly!" Ida's engines roared, but even his speed felt inadequate against the sheer scale of the panic. Izuku Midoriya, Deku, felt like he was being torn apart. He was perched on the edge of a 5-story building, the wind whipping at his green hair. One for all thrummed beneath his skin, a restless sea of power aching for release. But where? Where should he direct it? His mind was a frantic, overloaded switchboard. Think. Analyze. That's the first step, a voice in his head, the voice of reason and strategy, insisted. Chimera is the core. The aspects are projections. They flicker when he's distracted. His quirk must have a range, a power limit. If I can analyze the decay rate of the projections versus their distance from the main body, I can pinpoint a weakness. The paranoia aspect moves in a repeating 8-second pattern when planting. He pulled out his notebook, his hand shaking as he tried to jot down observations. But his eyes kept drifting down to the street, to a mother desperately trying to pull her son from the path of a toppling light pole. "Save them!" Another part of him screamed, a voice that was pure, bleeding empathy. "Forget the notes. People are going to get hurt. Your job is to save people. That's what a hero does. It's not about winning, it's about saving. Go! Now! Fight!" A third, more primal impulse snarled from the pit of his stomach. It was a physical urge, a deep-seated instinct. The rage aspect is overwhelming Kirishima. You have the power to stop it. A 45% Detroit smash would dissipate it, give everyone breathing room. Stop thinking, stop feeling, just move. The 3 drives, heart, brain, and body, were a warring trinity inside him. He was paralyzed by the sheer volume of his own heroic impulse. He saw all might in his mind's eye, a hero who could somehow be all 3 things at once, a brilliant tactician, a symbol of hope, and an unstoppable force of nature. But Izuku wasn't all might. He was just a boy, and the weight of these conflicting demands was crushing him. "Deku, report! We need a breakthrough!" came Aizawa's voice through his earpiece, strained and sharp. "What have you got?" Izuku's throat was dry. I'm working on it, sir." The projections seemed linked to his emotional state, but also, he stammered, his analytical train of thought derailed by the sight of the paranoia aspect placing a bomb on the main support pillar of the overpass where dozens of people were still trapped. "The overpass! It's going to come down!" He didn't wait for a reply. The primal need to act won out. Green lightning crackled around him as he launched himself from the roof. He was a verdant comet arcing through the smoke-filled air. He landed on the overpass with a ground-shaking thud, his boots skidding on the asphalt. He had to get to the pillar. He had to disarm the bomb. But between him and his goal stood the rage aspect, which turned its smoldering, featureless face towards him. Beyond it, he could see a small child, no older than 5, sobbing, frozen in fear directly in the shadow of the compromised pillar. The child's parents were on the other side of a pile of rubble, screaming his name. This was it. The impossible choice. Brain. The bomb is the priority. It has a 30-second timer. The energy signature is unstable. A concussive force, like a smash, might detonate it prematurely. You need to disable it manually. That requires focus and precision. The child is a secondary variable. Heart. The child. Look at him. He's terrified. He's going to be crushed. You have to get to him. The bomb doesn't matter if the boy dies. Save him. Comfort him. That's all that matters. Body. The rage is blocking your path. It's a physical obstacle. Punch through it. Annihilate it. Clear the way. Force is the only answer here. Stop hesitating. The timer on the bomb blinked ominously. 20 seconds. The rage aspect roared and charged. The child let out a terrified wail as a piece of concrete from the ceiling of the overpass broke loose and landed near him. "I have to do it all," Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. "I have to." He pushed one for all past its limits. Not just in his legs or his arms, but everywhere. He tried to force it to do 3 things at once. He funneled power into his legs to dodge the rage aspect, extended a black whip from his arm towards the child to pull him to safety, and tried to keep his mind clear enough to analyze the bomb's intricate wiring as he moved. It was too much. It felt like his very soul was being stretched on a rack. An agonizing, tearing sensation erupted from the core of his being. The green lightning of One for All flared, not just around him, but inside him, turning from a controlled crackle into a violent, uncontrolled nova. Pain, white-hot and absolute, seared through every nerve. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound of a being coming apart at the seams. Think. Feel. Act. The commands were no longer sequential thoughts. They were a singular, paradoxical demand tearing him into thirds. Think, feel, act. A blinding flash of emerald light detonated from his position. It was brighter than the sun, a silent, violent explosion of pure energy that bleached the color from the world. Every hero, villain, and civilian in the area threw up their arms, blinded. The roar of the rage aspect, the beeping of the bomb, the cries of the people, it all vanished, consumed by a deafening, ringing silence. The light held for 3 long, impossible seconds before collapsing back in on itself with a sound like a universe being born and dying in the same instant. Where one boy had stood, there were now 3. They lay on the cracked asphalt in a heap of tangled limbs and identical green and black costumes, a few feet from each other. For a moment, there was only the stunned stillness of the aftermath. The aspects of Chimera flickered violently, their connection to their master strained by the sheer psychic shockwave. Then, one of them stirred. He pushed himself up slowly, his body trembling. Tears were already streaming down his face, great, fat droplets that cut clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. His large, green eyes were wide with a raw, overwhelming flood of emotion. He saw the crying child, still frozen by the pillar, and nothing else in the world mattered. A sob escaped his lips, a sound of profound, shared terror and empathy. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring his own aching body, and rushed towards the boy, his movements clumsy but driven by an undeniable urgency. I'm here. It's okay. You're safe. This was Kokoro, the heart. He fell to his knees in front of the child, not even looking at the bomb just feet away, and wrapped his arms around him in a protective, trembling hug. The second figure sat up, but with a sharp, precise movement. He pushed his glasses, somehow perfectly intact, up the bridge of his nose. His brow was furrowed, not in fear, but in intense, cold concentration. He scanned the scene with a gaze that didn't see people, but variables. Rubble distribution. Structural integrity. Energy signatures. His lips were pursed, and soon, the familiar, rapid-fire muttering began, but it was different now. It was faster, more clinical, stripped of all its usual anxiety. Unforeseen quirk manifestation. He muttered, his voice a low, analytical hum. Massive energy release resulted in a fission of consciousness. 3 distinct physical bodies, biologically identical, sharing a single source of power, yet demonstrating independent cognitive function. Fascinating. And problematic. He looked at the bomb. His eyes narrowed. The energy loop is a simple alternating current. A kinetic jolt to the third capacitor should short-circuit the detonator. Childishly simple. This was Saku, the brain. He stood up, dusted off his costume with an annoyed flick of his wrist, and began walking calmly towards the bomb, completely ignoring the still-present rage aspect. The third figure exploded into motion. He didn't sit up, he sprung. He landed in a low crouch, every muscle coiled like a steel spring. There were no tears on his face, no analytical frown. His expression was one of pure, feral intensity. His knuckles were white where he clenched his fists. The green lightning of One for All wasn't just flickering around him. It was practically fused to his form, a second skin of raw power. He didn't see a complex situation. He saw a threat. The rage aspect, recovering from the blast, let out a guttural roar. This Deku roared back, a wordless challenge that was all instinct and aggression. This was Kurata, the body. He didn't need a plan. He didn't need a reason. The path was blocked. He would clear it. He launched himself forward, a cannonball of flesh and bone, his fist cocked back for a blow that was pure, unthinking destruction. The scene descended into a new, more personal kind of chaos. Idiot! Don't just charge in! Saku snapped, his voice sharp and condescending, not even looking at Kurata. Your uncalibrated kinetic output could destabilize the explosives. Kurata didn't hear him, or didn't care. He met the rage aspect head-on. The impact was thunderous. It was a collision of pure force, and Kurata was winning. His punches were faster, stronger, more vicious than Izuku's had ever been. He wasn't holding back. He wasn't worried about collateral damage. He was a weapon, and he was using himself perfectly. Please, be careful! Kokoro cried out, shielding the child with his own body as the shockwaves from Kurata's assault shook the overpass. He looked from the brutal fight to the dispassionate Saku approaching the bomb. We have to work together. Everyone is still in danger. Working together requires a baseline level of intellect I am not currently seeing from my counterparts. Saku retorted coldly. He knelt beside the bomb, his fingers tracing its casing. I will handle the tactical necessity. You handle the pointless emotional display. And he, Saku gestured dismissively at Kurata, can continue his brutish flailing. It serves as a useful distraction. The sheer arrogance in Saku's tone was staggering. It infuriated Kokoro. Pointless? I'm protecting a child. What's more important than that? The 37 other civilians on this overpass who will die if this pillar collapses. Saku answered without a hint of emotion. The hundreds more down below who will be caught in the blast radius. It's simple tria. A concept you seem incapable of grasping. While they argued, Kurata had managed to punch a hole straight through the rage aspect's chest. The creature shrieked and began to dissipate, its form dissolving like smoke in the wind. Kurata stood panting, the lightning around him sizzling. He glanced back, his glare falling on Saku's back. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the condescending tone. A low growl rumbled in his chest. This was their first attempt at teamwork. It was internal warfare made manifest. Chimera, who had been clutching his head from the psychic backlash, was now staring at the scene with wide, disbelieving eyes. His initial shock was melting away, replaced by a slow, dawning, utterly delighted grin. Oh my! He breathed, a soft, wicked chuckle escaping his lips. What have we here? You've divided yourself, little hero? You've taken your inner conflict and put it on display for all to see? This is better than I could have ever dreamed. His words drew their attention. 3 pairs of identical green eyes snapped towards him. I have a plan, Saku announced, standing up. The bomb beside him was dark, its timer dead. The villain is psychically taxed. His control over the remaining aspects is tenuous. Kokoro, your empathic abilities, while crude, should allow you to create an emotional feedback loop if you can get close enough. Karada, your purpose is obvious. Provide the overwhelming force. I will direct you to the structural weaknesses in his stance and quirk usage. Synchronize on my mark. It was a brilliant plan. Flawless. And it was delivered with all the warmth and charisma of a computer. Don't order us around! Karada snarled, his first coherent words. They were gravelly, raw. I don't want to get close to him! Kokoro cried, his entire being recoiling at the thought of approaching the source of so much pain and fear. I need to get this boy back to his parents. Saku's face contorted into a mask of pure frustration. Your priorities are illogical. The mission objective is the villain. Before they could argue further, a gray scarf shot out from the street level below, wrapping around Chimera with practiced, impossible speed. The villain's eyes widened, the cruel glee wiped from his face as his hair fell flat against his scalp. The remaining greed and paranoia aspects dissolved into nothingness instantly. That's enough. Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, pulled himself onto the overpass, his red, glowing eyes fixing on Chimera, then sweeping over the impossible sight of 3 Izuku Midoriyas. His perpetually tired face registered a flicker of profound, deep-seated shock, an expression so rare it was like seeing a statue weep. He took in the disarmed bomb, the crying child being comforted by one Deku, the analytical stance of the second, and the aggressive, battle-ready posture of the third. What, in the hell, happened to you, problem child? Aizawa's voice was dangerously quiet. The 3 Dekas had no answer. The adrenaline of the moment began to fade, replaced by a cold, dawning horror. They looked away from their teacher, away from the now captured villain, and looked at each other. For the first time, they truly saw each other. Kokoro saw a version of himself that was cold, arrogant, and seemingly heartless. He saw the sharp intelligence he'd always prided himself on twisted into something cruel. Saku saw a blubbering, irrational creature governed by pointless sentimentality, and a thoughtless brute who only knew how to hit things. He saw his own deepest insecurities, his emotional volatility, and his physical weakness, made flesh. Karada saw a coward who cried instead of fighting, and a weakling who stood around talking while there was still a battle to be won. He saw the hesitation and the overthinking that had always held him back. They were looking at reflections in a shattered mirror. And they hated what they saw. The sirens grew louder, converging on their location. Other pro-heroes were arriving to clean up, to process the villain, to cordon off the area. But for the 3 beings who were once Izuku Midoriya, the world had shrunk to the few feet of cracked pavement that separated them. The fight was over. But their war had just begun. Amidst the dust and the fading light of the afternoon, they could only stare at each other in horrified, silent disbelief. The transition from the raw, screaming chaos of the Kiyoshi ward to the sterile, hushed reverence of the UA infirmary was a violent form of whiplash. The air, once thick with smoke and the metallic tang of blood, was now sharp with the scent of antiseptic and clean linen. The world had shrunk from a sprawling, broken cityscape to the confines of a single, brightly lit room, where the only sound was the gentle, rhythmic hum of medical monitors. 3 identical beds were lined up in the center of the room. In each bed lay an identical boy, dressed in a standard Ishiyui tracksuit that felt foreign and wrong on their hero-costumed frames. The sight was surreal, a glitch in reality that 3 of the most experienced people at UA were struggling to process. Recovery Girl, her brow furrowed deeper than her wrinkles, adjusted her glasses as she reviewed a series of scans on a floating holographic display. The data swirled in a complex dance of green and red, showing 3 distinct life signs that were somehow, impossibly, tethered together. Beside her, Shota Aizawa stood with his arms crossed, his usual tired expression hardened into one of grim, exhausted disbelief. He looked like a man who had seen everything, only to be presented with something so fundamentally bizarre it reset his entire concept of a problem child. And then there was All Might. In his skeletal form, Toshinori Yagi looked smaller and more fragile than ever. He stood near the foot of the central bed, his sunken eyes flitting between the three boys, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were bone white. He wasn't just seeing a logistical nightmare, or a medical anomaly. He was seeing his legacy, his hope for the future, shattered into three warring pieces. The silence was broken by a choked, wet sound. From the bed on the left, the one closest to the window, the first Izuku sat up. This was Kokoro. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed and swimming with unshed tears. The moment he was conscious enough to process where he was, a wave of crushing guilt washed over him. He saw the solemn faces of his mentors, and his heart clenched. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. The words tumbled out of him in a desperate, hiccuping rush. "It's all my fault. I pushed myself too far. I lost control. The villain, the people. I failed. I'm so sorry." He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He felt the weight of every potential casualty, every moment of fear he had caused, as a physical burden on his soul. From the middle bed, the second Izuku stirred. Sokka's eyes fluttered open, not with groggy confusion, but with the sharp focus of a camera lens snapping into clarity. He sat up straight, his back rigid. He took in the room, his counterparts, the adults, the medical data on the screen, all in a single, sweeping glance. He pushed a pair of imaginary glasses up his nose, a phantom gesture of pure habit. "Apologies are an inefficient expenditure of energy," Sokka stated, his voice flat and devoid of any of the warmth or anxiety that usually characterized Izuku Midoriya's speech. He turned his clinical gaze on Kokoro. "Your emotional outburst provides no useful data and actively impedes a clear assessment of the current situation." "Cease." Kokoro flinched as if struck. He looked at Sokka, his tear-filled eyes wide with hurt and confusion. "But I failed them. I failed everyone." "Incorrect," Sokka countered immediately. "We experienced an uncontrolled quirk event. The failure was a cascade of systemic overload, not a singular emotional lapse. The root cause was an attempt to simultaneously execute three contradictory directives: tactical analysis, civilian protection, and offensive engagement. The result was a forced fission of the core consciousness into specialized units. The question is not why did we fail, but what are the parameters of this new state?" While Sokka spoke, a growl of frustration came from the third bed. Kurata threw his blanket off with a single, violent motion. He didn't sit up. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, his bare feet hitting the cold tile floor with a solid thud. One for all's green lightning, though faint, still crackled around his fists. He was a tightly coiled spring of impatience, his body screaming for motion, for impact. Being confined to a bed, listening to Sokka's sterile lecture and Kokoro's weeping, was a unique form of torture. "Stop talking," Kurata grunted, his voice a low rumble. He began to pace the small space at the foot of his bed, a caged tiger in a space far too small for his energy. Every line of his body radiated a restless, aggressive impatience. He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. The subject designated Kurata demonstrates a primitive aversion to intellectual discourse and an overabundance of kinetic energy, Sokka observed aloud, as if narrating a nature documentary. His pacing is a physical manifestation of his inability to process complex stimuli. Fascinating. Kurata stopped pacing and glared at Sokka, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "You want complex stimuli? I'll show you complex stimuli. Enough!" Aizawa's voice cut through the tension like a razor. It wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that made all three of them freeze. Even Kurata stopped his menacing advance. "All of you. Sit, be quiet. You are in the UA infirmary. You are not to move, not to speak, not to so much as breathe loudly until we figure out what is going on." Kokoro immediately complied, sinking back into his pillows, looking chastened. Saku raised a single eyebrow, an expression of mild annoyance at being interrupted, but he remained seated. Kurata held Aizawa's gaze for a long, defiant moment before letting out a frustrated sigh and sitting heavily on the edge of his bed, his leg bouncing with unspent energy. Recovery Girl finally turned away from her screens, her expression deeply troubled. "Well," she began, her voice weary. "The good news is that none of you are dying." She paused. "The bad news is, I have absolutely no idea how to fix this." She gestured to the holographic display. "Your biology is a paradox. You are 3 distinct separate bodies. 3 hearts, 3 brains, 3 sets of lungs, but you are all drawing from a single, central wellspring of life force. And at the core of that wellspring is one for all." Toshinori stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Can they merge back together?" Recovery Girl shook her head slowly. "I don't believe so. Not at will. The event was traumatic, a violent tearing. Forcing a reintegration now, it could be catastrophic. It might kill them all." Imagine trying to shove 3 people into a phone booth that was only ever built for one. The psychic and physical feedback would be immense. She looked at the 3 boys. "Your vitals are linked. When Kokoro's heart rate spikes from emotional distress, Saku's and Kurata's rise in tandem, albeit slightly. When Kurata exerts himself physically, Kokoro feels the phantom exhaustion and Saku's cognitive speed experiences a fractional dip due to energy reallocation. You are a closed system, 3 terminals running off of one overloaded server." Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose, closing his eyes as if warding off a migraine of epic proportions. "So they're stuck like this? For the foreseeable future, it would seem so," Recovery Girl confirmed. Aizawa let out a long, suffering sigh. He opened his eyes and leveled a stare at the trio. "Do you have any idea what this means? We don't have protocols for this. Do we issue 3 student IDs? Do you require 3 dorm rooms? Do you all take the same test, or does he gestured to Saku, take the written exams and he pointed a thumb at Kurata, handle all the physical exercises? What about your hero license? Are you 1 hero or 3? This is a logistical, legal, and existential nightmare." Kokoro looked horrified at the implications. Saku looked intrigued, as if presented with a fascinating new puzzle. Kurata just looked bored by the talk of rules and paperwork. All Might finally found his voice, stepping past Aizawa. He looked at the 3 faces that were all his successor, yet none of them were. He started with the one that seemed most familiar. "Young Kokoro," he said, his voice gentle. "I know you feel guilty, but this was not your fault. You have always carried the weight of the world on your shoulders. It is your greatest strength." Kokoro's eyes welled up with fresh tears, but these were tears of gratitude. "All Might," Toshinori then turned to Saku. "And young Saku, your mind, your analytical ability, it has saved you and your friends countless times. It is a vital tool for any hero." Saku gave a curt, single nod. "A logical assessment. Your praise, while appreciated, is unnecessary." Finally, Toshinori looked at Kurata, whose restless energy seemed to fill the room. "And young Kurata, your drive, your power, your will to act and protect, that is the engine of One for All. It is the fire that forges a hero." Kurata didn't respond with words. He just met All Might's gaze, a flicker of something, respect, understanding, in his intense eyes before he looked away, as if uncomfortable with the direct praise. All Might's shoulders slumped. He had spoken to each of them, to each piece of the boy he had chosen, but the conversation felt disjointed, incomplete. He was talking to an echo chamber of fractured traits. But a hero, Izuku, needs to be all of those things at once. He finished, his voice heavy with sorrow. A heart to guide him. A mind to strategize. A body to act. Separated, how can you be the hero you were meant to be? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. After several more hours of tests and fruitless theoretical discussions, a decision was made. They couldn't stay in the infirmary forever, with a stern warning from Aizawa to try not to cause a dimensional rift before dinner. The three were escorted back to the Heights Alliance dormitory. The news had, inevitably, trickled out. Aizawa had given the rest of Class 1A a brief, heavily redacted summary of the situation. Midoriya had a quirk-related incident. He is stable, but altered. Do not crowd him. Do not ask stupid questions. As the three of them walked through the doors of the common room, a heavy silence fell over the students gathered there. Uraraka gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Ida adjusted his glasses, his body going rigid with shock. Todoroki's heterochromatic eyes widened fractionally, the only outward sign of his surprise. They were a bizarre spectacle. Kokoro walked with his head down, radiating shame and anxiety, wringing his hands. Saku walked with a stiff, formal posture, his eyes scanning his classmates as if they were specimens in a petri dish. And Kurata stalked behind them, his hands shoved in his pockets, a scowl etched onto his face as he glared at anyone who stared for too long. They didn't walk like a group, they walked like three strangers who had been forced into a line. Midoriya-kun? Uraraka's voice was a small, hesitant thing. She took a step forward, her expression a painful mix of worry and confusion. Are you all okay? We are physiologically stable, Uraraka-san. Saka answered for them, his tone clinical. The long-term prognosis, however, is subject to further data collection. Kokoro flinched at his coldness and offered her a weak, watery smile. We're fine, Uraraka-san. Don't worry. It's just a lot. Kurata just grunted and moved towards the corner of the room, putting as much space as possible between himself and the concerned crowd. Ida chopped the air with his hand, though with less vigor than usual. Aizawa-sensei informed us of your predicament. While this is a highly irregular situation, rest assured that as your class president, I will do everything in my power to ensure a smooth transition and accommodate your new plurality. The well-intentioned declaration only made the situation more awkward. The rest of the class watched, unsure what to say or do. They were looking at their friend, their earnest, kind, muttering friend, and seeing him refracted into three unsettling reflections. And then, the door to the common room slammed open. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his baggy pants. He had clearly just come from the training grounds. He was still sweating, and his face was smeared with soot. His crimson eyes swept across the room, ignoring everyone else, and locked onto the trio. He scanned them one by one. Kokoro, who shrank under his glare. Saku, who met his gaze with unnerving analytical stillness. Kurata, who bristled, his posture becoming instantly more aggressive. Bakugo's lip curled into a sneer of utter contempt. He took a slow, deliberate step into the room, the silence stretching taut. Everyone held their breath. Heh! Bakugo let out a dry, humorless laugh. He shook his head in disbelief. I always knew you were a mess, Deku. Always trying to be 10 things at once, crying 1 minute, muttering like a creep the next, then throwing punches you can't even control. He stopped in the center of the room, his voice dripping with a unique brand of cruel, insightful venom. But this is a new level of pathetic. He pointed a finger, jabbing it at the three of them as a collective. You were already a damn mess, and now you've managed to triple it, you useless nerd. The words hit the air with the force of a physical blow. The effect on the three Midoriyas was immediate, distinct, and catastrophic. Kokoro shattered. Bakugo's words were a direct validation of every ounce of self-hatred and guilt he was feeling. He saw himself as Bakugo saw him, a useless, emotional wreck. A fresh wave of tears spilled down his cheeks, and a choked sob escaped his lips. He couldn't even form a reply, just mumbled a pathetic I'm sorry, Kaken, before covering his face with his hands, utterly humiliated. Saku, however, remained impassive. His head tilted slightly. An interesting hypothesis, he said, his voice laced with an infuriating calmness. However, your premise is flawed. You are conflating specialization with the state of being a mess. One could argue this is a more efficient distribution of cognitive and physical resources. Your statement is predicated on an emotional bias and lacks any empirical evidence. It is, therefore, logically unsound and can be dismissed as irrelevant noise. Bakugo's eye started to twitch. Being psychoanalyzed and dismissed by a version of Deku was an offense on a level he had never before conceived. But it was Kurata's reaction that changed the atmosphere in the room from tense to dangerous. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply reacted. Bakugo's words weren't an insult to him. They were a challenge. A declaration of dominance. And Kurata's entire being was programmed to meet such challenges head-on. He pushed off the wall, taking a deliberate step forward. The air around him practically crackled. The faint green lightning of One for All, which had been dormant, now flared to life, dancing up and down his arms. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. He didn't look angry in the explosive way Bakugo did. He looked cold, focused, and utterly lethal. His glare promised nothing but violence. He saw Bakugo not as a childhood rival, but as an opponent who had just thrown the first punch. And he was going to retaliate with overwhelming force. Bakugo's sneer widened into a predatory grin. He saw Kurata's reaction and recognized it for what it was. A real fight. Finally. Oh? So this one's got some spine? About damn time. Small explosions began to pop and crackle in his palms. Bakugo, stop it! Kirishima yelled, stepping forward to try and get between them. This is highly inappropriate conduct, Ida declared, moving to intervene. But it was too late. The fuse had been lit. Kurata took another step forward, lowering into a combat stance. Bakugo mirrored him, his body thrumming with anticipation. Before either of them could launch, a gray scarf shot between them, embedding itself in the wall with a sharp thwip. That's enough. Aizawa stood in the doorway, his eyes glowing a menacing red, his hair floating around his head. Bakugo, my office. Now. His gaze then fell on Kurata, and the glow intensified. And you, stand down. Under the force of Aizawa's quirk, the green lightning around Kurata sputtered and died. The raw power receded, leaving behind a boy trembling with unspent fury. He shot one last venomous glare at Bakugo before slowly, reluctantly, straightening up. Bakugo just scoffed, shot a final look of contempt at the three Dekus, and stomped out of the room after Aizawa. The common room was left in a state of stunned, ringing silence. The confrontation had lasted less than a minute, but it had laid bare the terrifying new reality. Kokoro was still crying softly, being hesitantly comforted by a worried Uraraka. Sokka was looking at the spot where Kurata had stood, his expression unreadable, perhaps recalculating his assessment of their new dynamic. And Kurata stood alone, radiating a palpable aura of frustration and aggression. There were three minds in one room. A weeping heart, a cold brain, and a furious body. They were supposed to be one person, the next symbol of peace. But as they stood there, fractured and at war with themselves and the world, it was clear they weren't even a team. They were just the shattered pieces of Izuku Midoriya, and right now, all they knew how to do was cut each other. The next 48 hours at Heights Alliance were a study in quiet, awkward tension. The Deku Trinity, as Kaminari had nervously nicknamed them, existed in a state of fragile, non-communicative orbit around one another. They were a gravitational anomaly in the social fabric of Class 1A. Kokoro spent most of his time in the common room, a mournful satellite trying desperately to re-establish a normal connection. He'd sit with Uraraka and Ida, his presence a constant, silent apology. He'd listen to their conversations, offer weak smiles, and flinch at any loud noise. He was a raw, exposed nerve of empathy, and his friends, for all their kindness, didn't know how to handle him. They spoke to him in gentle, careful tones, as if he were made of spun glass, which only made him feel more broken. Sokka claimed a corner of the dorm's study lounge as his sovereign territory. He requisitioned a small table and surrounded himself with a fortress of books, advanced physics, quark theory, engineering manuals, tactical treatises. He filled notebooks with dense, frantic scrawls of analysis, diagrams, and equations, his muttering a constant, low-frequency hum that unnerved anyone who sat too close. When approached, he would look up with an expression of profound annoyance, answer any question with curt, minimalist precision, and immediately return to his work, making it clear that he considered social interaction a complete waste of processing power. Kurata's domain was the gym. From dawn until curfew, he was a whirlwind of relentless motion. He'd spend hours pummeling reinforced punching bags until the sand inside compacted into stone. He ran on the treadmill at speeds that threatened to burn out the motor. He lifted weights with a ferocity that made even Sato and Shoji stare. He rarely spoke, communicating instead through grunts of effort and the percussive rhythm of his training. The gym was his sanctuary, the one place where the restless, thrumming energy of one for all could be vented without judgment. He was pure physical instinct, and the complex social etiquette of the dorm was a language he no longer understood or cared to learn. Shota Aizawa observed this disastrous tripartite existence with a growing sense of dread. They weren't adapting. They were diverging. They were three specialized components that had forgotten they were once part of the same machine. They couldn't continue like this. A hero, even a fractured one, who couldn't function as a unit was not a hero. He was a liability. And so, on the third morning, Aizawa decided to force the issue. He found them in their respective territories. Kokoro staring blankly at a news report about their battle, Saku reverse engineering the schematics for Yairo's support gear from memory, and Kurata in the middle of a set of explosive push-ups. All of you. Aizawa's voice cut through their individual worlds. Ground Gamma. Now. Full costumes. There was no room for argument. They complied, the three of them walking in a tense, silent line to the locker rooms, changing, and meeting at the entrance to the sprawling urban training facility. The familiar sight of the mock city, with its concrete canyons and glass-paneled towers, felt different today. It felt like an arena. Aizawa stood before them, his expression as impassive as the concrete buildings around them. This situation is untenable, he began, his tone leaving no doubt as to how serious he was. You cannot function as three separate, competing entities. From now on, you are not Kokoro, Saku, and Kurata. You are a single hero unit, Deku. And you will learn to act like it. He gestured to the cityscape behind him. The exercise is simple. A disaster scenario. There has been a simulated villain attack. There are structural fires, unstable buildings, and 10 civilian dummies trapped in various locations. Your objective is to locate and rescue all 10 dummies and transport them to the designated safe zone at the city entrance. You have 1 hour. He fixed them with a hard stare. This is not a test of your individual abilities. I already know what each of you can do. This is a test of your ability to cooperate, to communicate, to function. Do you understand? Kokoro nodded earnestly, his face a mask of determination. Yes, sir. We'll do our best. Saku adjusted his metal face guard, his eyes already scanning the layout of Ground Gamma. The parameters are clear. The objective is quantifiable. Understood. Kurata just cracked his neck, the sound sharp in the morning air. He looked at the towering buildings, his gaze hungry. This was better than a stuffy dorm room. This was a place for action. Aizawa's lips thinned into a grim line. Don't do your best. Don't just understand. Succeed. Your future as a hero, as any kind of hero, depends on it. The drill begins now. A loud buzzer echoed through the training ground, and Aizawa turned and walked away, leaving the three of them alone at the threshold of the challenge. For a moment, they just stood there. The air was thick with an unspoken challenge. Who would take the lead? Unsurprisingly, it was Saku. Halt! He commanded, putting out a hand to stop Kokoro, who had already been about to dash in, and Kurata, who was tensing to launch himself onto the nearest roof. Uncoordinated action is the most direct path to failure. A strategic framework must be established first. He pointed a gloved finger towards the central plaza. The highest concentration of structural instability appears to be in Sector 3. Logically, that is where the highest number of casualties will be. However, it is also the most hazardous. The perimeter buildings in Sectors 1 and 4 are more stable, but their complex interior layouts make them ideal for isolated, hidden victims. He began to mutter, pacing back and forth, but his muttering was now a strategic briefing. Therefore, a three-pronged approach is optimal. I will take a high vantage point to act as overwatch and command. My analytical skills are best utilized from a position where I can observe the entire field and coordinate our efforts. Kurata, your mobility and power make you the ideal search and extraction unit for the high-risk central sector. You will move fast, locate targets, and clear debris. Kokoro, your heightened empathy will make you effective at locating the more cleverly hidden, panicked civilians in the perimeter sectors. You have a tendency to be drawn to sounds of distress, which, in this controlled scenario, can be weaponized into an effective search pattern. He stopped pacing and looked at them. It was, objectively, a flawless plan. It utilized each of their strengths perfectly. It was a symphony of tactical efficiency. It was also delivered with the condescending air of a chess master telling his pawns where to move. Kurata scoffed. So I do the heavy lifting, you watch from a roof, and he jerked a thumb at Kokoro. Goes on a scavenger hunt for crying dolls? No thanks. I'll find them faster by myself. My method would be more thorough. Kokoro protested, stung by Kurata's dismissive tone. What if one of the dummies is trapped somewhere quiet? You'd run right past it. The probability of a completely silent, hidden dummy is less than 14%. Sakura interjected, his voice sharp with irritation. My plan accounts for the most likely distribution of targets. Your emotional objections are statistically irrelevant. We are wasting time. Adhere to the strategy. Stop telling us what to do. Kurata snarled, taking a step towards Saku. I am not telling you what to do. Saku retorted, his voice rising in pitch. I am presenting the most logical path to success. A path your primitive brain is apparently too dense to comprehend. You want to see dense? Kurata's fists clenched, and the familiar green lightning began to spark. Stop it! Both of you! Kokoro shouted, stepping between them. He had tears in his eyes, but this time they were tears of pure frustration. Aizawa-sensei is watching! We have to do this! We have to work together! His desperate plea seemed to get through to them, if only barely. Kurata grunted and looked away, the lightning subsiding. Saku let out a sharp, frustrated sigh and turned his back on them. Fine. Saku bit out. The plan is in motion. I am proceeding to the command position. I expect you two to follow your directives. Do not deviate. With that, he used a controlled burst of one for all, launching himself up the side of a 10-story building with practiced, spider-like movements. He landed on the roof and immediately knelt, pulling a pair of high-powered binoculars from a pouch on his belt. Down below, Kurata and Kokoro were left in a tense, simmering silence. I'm going to Sector 3. Kurata finally grunted, and without another word he blasted off, leaving a miniature crater in the asphalt. He became a green blur, rocketing into the heart of the most damaged part of the city. Kokoro was left alone. He looked at the empty street, the imposing buildings, and felt a profound sense of failure already settling in his stomach. The plan had been laid out, but the team had already fractured before the first step was even completed. Still, he had his orders. He took a deep breath, wiped his eyes, and ran towards the perimeter buildings of Sector 1. I can do this, he whispered to himself. I can find them. From his perch, Saku had a god's eye view of the exercise. He could see everything. And everything was going wrong. Kurata, report, he said into his comms unit, his voice clipped. The only reply was a burst of static and the distant, thunderous crack of something heavy being demolished. Kurata, I repeat, report your status, Saku insisted. Have you located any targets? Found one, came the gravelly reply, breathless and strained. Behind a bus. Way is blocked. Moving it. Do not move it, Saku snapped. The bus is adjacent to the M2 building, which has a 72% chance of secondary collapse if its foundation is jostled. Use your black whip to extract the target from a distance. The only response was another, louder crunch and a cloud of dust rising from Kurata's position. A moment later, Kurata's voice came back, laced with smug satisfaction. Got it. Bus is gone. Target is clear. Saku wanted to scream. He gripped his binoculars so tightly his knuckles turned white. You reckless, brainless troglodyte! You have potentially compromised the entire sector! He took a deep, calming breath. Fine. Damage was done. He had to adjust. He turned his attention to the other side of the field. Kokoro, what is your status? Kokoro's voice came back, small and trembling. I think I heard something. In this old department store. It's very dark inside. Provide coordinates, Saku commanded. I will analyze the building schematics for potential collapse points. I don't know, Kokoro stammered. I just ran towards the sound. You what? Saku's carefully controlled composure finally cracked. You entered an unsecured structure without establishing its integrity, or even knowing your own location? Of all the sentimental, idiotic. He cut himself off, forcing himself back to logic. Describe your surroundings. Any landmarks? Street signs? But as he spoke, he heard it through Kokoro's open, faint, pre-recorded sound loop. Help me! I'm scared, please help me! And Kokoro's voice, full of genuine, heartfelt pain. I'm coming! Don't worry! I'll get you out of there! Saku's blood ran cold. Kokoro, wait! That's a designated trap. The sound is designed to lure you into a structurally unsound area. My analysis of the drill parameters predicted this. Get out of there now! But Kokoro wasn't listening. He was following his heart, and his heart was leading him straight into danger. On his comm, Saku could hear the creak of stressed floorboards, the trickle of falling dust. Kokoro, do you read me? Abort! That is a direct order. The line was filled with the sound of a sharp crack, followed by a terrified scream. Then silence. Kokoro! Saku yelled, his voice raw with something that felt dangerously like panic. Respond! No answer. Kokoro fell. The floor had given way beneath him, plunging him into the darkness of the basement below. He landed hard on a pile of debris, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Pain flared in his ankle. He cried out, a sharp yelp of pain and fear. Above him, the hole he had fallen through was a small rectangle of gray light. Hello? He called out, his voice shaking. Is anyone there? Only the drip, drip, drip of water in the darkness answered him. The pre-recorded cries for help had stopped. He was alone, in the dark, and hurt. He fumbled for his comm unit, but it had been smashed in the fall. He was trapped. And it was his own fault. Saku had warned him. His own reckless empathy, his need to save someone, even a dummy, had led him right into a trap. He pulled his knees to his chest, the darkness of the basement pressing in on him, and began to cry, overwhelmed by his own foolishness. Meanwhile, Kurata was a force of nature. He was finding dummies with an animalistic efficiency. He wasn't searching, he was hunting. He'd smash through a wall, spot a flash of orange plastic, and tear through whatever was in his way to get to it. He had already rescued 4 targets, simply dropping them unceremoniously in the safe zone before rocketing back into the fray. But Saku's fears were being realized. Kurata's methods were destructive. He didn't open doors, he made new ones. He didn't clear paths, he leveled them. He punched through a concrete pillar to create a shortcut, not realizing it was a key support for the building next to it. From his rooftop, Saku watched in horror as a deep, groaning sound echoed through the sector. A 5-story office building, its structural integrity fatally compromised by Kurata's shortcut, began to tilt. Kurata, you imbecile! Saku screamed into his comm. The B7 building is collapsing because of you. There are 2 targets on the 3rd floor. Get them out now! Kurata looked up from his work, his eyes widening as he saw the building lean at a dangerous angle. For the first time, a flicker of something other than aggression crossed his face, panic. He had been so focused on the immediate obstacle that he hadn't seen the catastrophic chain reaction he had set off. I'm on it! He yelled back, and blasted towards the tilting structure. This was it. The entire drill had devolved into a complete and utter catastrophe. It wasn't just a failure, it was a disaster of their own making. In the observation room, Aizawa watched the multiple monitor feeds with a stony expression. All Might, standing beside him, looked physically ill. This is worse than I imagined, Shota, Tashinori said, his voice a strained whisper. I knew it would be bad, Aizawa replied, his voice grim. I didn't think it would be this self-destructive. Saku's plan was perfect, but his delivery was alienating. Kokoro's heart is in the right place, but it's a liability without a brain to guide it. And Kurata, he's all power with no foresight. They're actively sabotaging each other. On the screen, they watched Kurata dive through a third-story window of the collapsing building. They saw another feed from a basement camera, showing Kokoro huddled in the dark, and they saw the main feed from Sokka's vantage point, showing him pacing on the roof, his hands clenched in rage and helplessness. Their greatest enemy is themselves, Aizawa stated, his voice flat. He looked at the timer. 20 minutes had passed. They had rescued 4 of the 10 dummies, trapped one of their own, and were about to bring down an entire city block. It was a failure of magnificent proportions. On the rooftop, Sokka was experiencing a system crash. His perfect plan, his flawless logic, had been obliterated by the irrational, chaotic actions of his other selves. They were not predictable variables. They were agents of chaos. He was a master strategist whose army had staged a mutiny against him and themselves. He was failing. The thought was so foreign, so deeply offensive to his core identity, that it almost paralyzed him. He had always been the smart one, the one who saw the angles, the one with the answers. But his answers were useless if no one would listen. He looked across the field. He saw the dust cloud from Kurata's rampage. He knew Kokoro was trapped somewhere in the perimeter, and he knew, with a certainty that felt like ice in his veins, that they would not succeed. He closed his eyes. He shut out the sounds of the disaster. He forced his racing mind to slow down. He analyzed the new data. Fact: the original plan is a failure. Fact: Kokoro is incapacitated and emotionally compromised. Fact: Kurata is causing more damage than he is fixing. Fact: they were operating as 3 individuals, and it was leading to ruin. A new conclusion began to form, a painful, humiliating, but undeniably logical one. He couldn't do this alone. He couldn't just command them. He had to connect with them. He had to adjust his strategy to account for their flawed, infuriating, human natures. He opened his comm link, but this time, he didn't bark an order. His voice, when he spoke, was different. The arrogant, condescending edge was gone, replaced by a grim, focused urgency. "Kurata," he said, his voice tight. "Listen to me. The building is coming down. You have less than 90 seconds. Forget the dummies. Get out of there." There was a pause, then Kurata's voice, strained with effort. "I can still get them." "No, you can't." Sokka's voice cracked, a fissure in his icy composure. "The stress fractures are cascading. You will be buried. That is not a probability, it is a certainty. I need you. We need you. Get out, now." The use of the word, "we," was not lost on Kurata. Amidst the groan of twisting metal, there was a moment of silence. Then, "Fine." A few seconds later, Kurata burst from a window on the opposite side of the building, 2 dummies tucked under his arms. He landed on a neighboring roof just as the entire structure behind him imploded, collapsing in on itself in a monumental cloud of dust and debris. Kurata stood there, panting, watching the ruin he had caused. He had 6 of the 10 dummies. But the cost was immense. Sokka didn't give him time to dwell on it. "Kurata. Kokoro is trapped. I'm transmitting his last known coordinates to your HUD. He fell into the basement of the old Cebu department store in Sector 1. The structure is unstable, but I need you to get him." "Why?" Kurata grunted, his voice still rough. "He's useless. Crying in a hole somewhere, because he is part of this unit," Sokka said, the words tasting strange and foreign in his mouth. "And he would do the same for you." That, at least, was a logic Kurata could understand. The instinct to protect a teammate, even a frustrating one. He gave a sharp nod, though Sokka couldn't see it. "On my way." Sokka watched the green blur of Kurata rocket across the city. He had established a connection. A fragile, temporary one, but it was a start. It wasn't the clean, efficient command structure he had envisioned. It was messy. It was compromised. But it was better than nothing. He looked at the smoldering ruin of their drill, at the timer ticking down, at the immense failure they had wrought. And for the first time, Sokka, the brain, understood that logic alone would never be enough. The dust from the collapsed building and ground gamma settled, but the metaphorical dust from their catastrophic failure took much longer to clear. The official result of the disaster drill was a grade so low it didn't exist on UA's normal scale. They had rescued 6 of the 10 dummies, but in the process, they had incurred property damage estimated in the tens of millions of yen, structurally compromised an entire sector, and managed to get 1/3 of their own unit killed in a basement. Aizawa's debrief was a masterpiece of cold, brutal honesty. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His quiet, disappointed dissection of their every mistake was far more devastating. He replayed footage for them on the large monitor in the observation room. Sokka's arrogant, counterproductive commands, Kokoro walking blindly into a trap against direct orders, Kurata's reckless rampage causing a building to collapse. They were forced to watch their dysfunction on a loop. "You are not a team," Aizawa concluded, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "You are not even a functional entity. You are a liability. To the public, to your classmates, and most of all, to yourselves. Until you can prove otherwise, all three of you are suspended from all field training and work-study patrols. You will focus on remedial teamwork exercises, and you will do it until you get it right." Dismissed. The word hung in the air like a guillotine's blade. Dismissed. It felt like a verdict on their entire future. They walked back to the dorms in a shroud of suffocating silence. The usual tension between them was gone, replaced by something heavier, a shared, crushing shame. There were no snide remarks from Saku, no tears from Kokoro, no growls from Kurata. There was just the quiet, miserable shuffling of 3 pairs of identical red boots on the pavement. The days that followed were a new kind of hell. The forced proximity of Aizawa's remedial teamwork exercises was a constant torment. They were made to do everything together. Eat together. Study together. Clean the common areas together. It was supposed to foster unity, but it only highlighted their schisms. Mealtimes were a silent, awkward affair. Kokoro would try to make conversation, his voice small and hopeful, only to be met with Sokka's disinterested hums and Kurata's pointed silence, as he wolfed down his food with aggressive speed. Study sessions were worse. Sokka would grasp complex subjects instantly, then grow visibly frustrated at having to explain them to his counterparts. "It's simple quantum mechanics," he'd snap, pointing at a diagram. "The waveform collapses upon observation. It's not a difficult concept." Kokoro would just look lost, his mind unable to focus through the haze of his anxiety, while Kurata would just stare out the window, his leg bouncing with a desperate need to be anywhere else. They were fundamentally, irrevocably lonely. Kokoro felt it most acutely. He was a being made of empathy, starved of genuine connection. He would try to talk to Uraraka and Ida, but the conversations were strained. They were talking to a piece of their friend, and they didn't know how to bridge the gap. He could see the pity and confusion in their eyes, and it made him want to shrink away. He was the heart of Izuku Midoriya, but he felt utterly heart-sore. Saku, surrounded by the greatest young minds in the country, felt an intellectual isolation that was almost physical. He could debate quark theory with Yaoyorozu or physics with Ida, but there was always a barrier. They saw him as brain Deku, a curiosity, not a peer. He saw their emotional responses to problems as flawed data sets, their camaraderie an illogical variable he couldn't account for. He was the mind of Izuku Midoriya, but he was trapped in a prison of his own intellect, unable to form a true meeting of minds. Kurata's loneliness was the most primal. He was a body built for action, for the visceral connection of combat and shared struggle. He'd watched Bakugo and Kirishima spar, a raw, powerful envy coiling in his gut. They had an understanding that transcended words, a language spoken in fists and sweat and gritted teeth. He tried to join in once, but his intensity was too much, his control too raw. He wasn't sparring, he was fighting. He didn't have a partner, he had a target. He was the body of Izuku Midoriya, but he was disconnected from the world, a weapon locked in a safety case with no one to wield him. There were 3 parts of a whole, each missing the other 2, and the phantom limb pain of that separation was a constant, dull ache. They were never more alone than when they were standing right next to each other, far from the hallowed grounds of UA, in a room bathed in the cold, blue glow of multiple computer monitors. A different kind of observation was taking place. The room was sparse, utilitarian. The only decorations were maps of the city, news clippings, and complex network charts pinned to a corkboard. A figure sat before the central monitor, his face obscured by shadow. He was slender, dressed in a simple, dark suit, and moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. He steepled his fingers beneath his chin, his gaze fixed on the screen. He was watching a pirated, high-resolution security feed from the battle in the Kiashi ward. He had watched it 27 times. This was Kenshin aka Overlord, a man who considered himself not a villain, but a social architect. He didn't deal in brute force or chaotic destruction. He dealt in systems. He analyzed society as a complex machine, and his goal was to expose its weaknesses, to break the gears he deemed flawed, to force an evolution through controlled collapse. And the hero system, in his view, was the most flawed, rust-eaten gear of all. His quirk was subtle, unimpressive in a fight, but devastatingly effective for his purposes. It was called resonance. By touching a device, he could get a perfect, intuitive understanding of its systems, its purpose, and its weaknesses. He could feel the flow of data through a server, the stress points in a security network, the faulty logic in a piece of code. He had used it to amass a small fortune, build a network of informants, and remain a ghost to the authorities. He had become fascinated by the new Deku. The media had dubbed him the fractured hero, a name he found beautifully, poetically apt. While the Hero Public Safety Commission was working overtime to spin the story as a controlled quirk evolution, Overlord saw the truth. He had hacked into UA's servers, a task he found insultingly simple, and downloaded the unedited footage from their disaster drill. He now played it on a secondary monitor, a small window of chaos next to the larger footage of the initial split. He watched Sokka's brilliant but alienating plan. He watched Kokoro's compassionate but foolish charge into a trap. He watched Kurata's powerful but thoughtless destruction. A low chuckle, smooth as polished obsidian, rumbled in his chest. His associate, a hulking woman with a cybernetic arm named Forge, stood silently by the door. "They see a problem," Overlord murmured, his voice a soft baritone. "A broken hero in need of fixing. They are trying to glue the pieces back together." He gestured to the screen with a flick of his wrist. "They are fools. They are looking at a shattered vase and thinking only of the vase. They don't appreciate the beauty of the shards. What do you see, sir?" Forge's voice was a low, synthesized rasp. Overlord leaned closer to the screen, his eyes gleaming with intellectual hunger. "I see a system. A micro-society in 3 bodies. A living embodiment of the classic Freudian triad, the ID, the ego, and the superego. Kurata, the body, is the ID, all primal instinct, desire, and aggression. He wants to fight, to act, to do. Kokoro, the heart, is the superego, the moral compass, driven by empathy, guilt, and the desperate need to save everyone. He is the should and should not. And Saku, the brain, he is the ego, the logician, the mediator, trying and failing to balance the demands of the other two with the harsh realities of the world." He smiled, a thin, predatory curve of his lips. "And like any poorly managed system, it is riddled with exploitable weaknesses. Its strength is entirely dependent on the flawless cooperation of its components, but they don't cooperate. They conflict. They undermine one another. They are a 3-headed beast at war with itself." He pulled up a new set of files on his main screen, detailed schematics of a high-tech research facility on the outskirts of the city, run by Detonarat. It housed bleeding-edge data servers and a prototype for a next-generation city-wide security network. "Forge," Overlord said, his eyes still locked on the footage of the 3 Dekus. "I believe it is time for a field test. Not for us. For them." He began to type, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a surgeon's precision. A plan was forming in his mind, not a blunt instrument of a plan like chimeras, but a sophisticated, multi-layered trap. A trap designed not to crush the hero, but to dissect him. A 3-headed beast at war with itself. He mused again, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Separate the heads, and the body will fall." He would not attack them all at once. That would force them together, make them unite against a common enemy. No, his plan was far more elegant. He would create 3 distinct, simultaneous crises. Each crisis would be tailored, designed as a perfect lure for one of the heads, and one alone. "Forge, begin preparations. I want a scenario that is an irresistible lure for each of them. A problem only one of them would feel uniquely qualified, or compelled, to solve, he smiled. He would give the brain a puzzle he couldn't resist, the heart a tragedy he couldn't ignore, and the body a challenge he couldn't back down from. He would isolate them, turn their greatest strengths into their fatal flaws, and watch the entire system crash. And under the cover of their failure, he would acquire the Detonarat prototype and gain the keys to the city's entire digital kingdom. The fractured hero wouldn't just be a means to an end. He would be the centerpiece of Overlord's grandest architectural statement. He would be the lesson. Back at UA, All Might requested a private meeting. Not with the Trinity. With each of them, individually. He knew, instinctively, that addressing them as a group was useless. He needed to speak to the pieces. He met Kokoro first, in one of the school's quiet counseling rooms. The boy sat hunched on the sofa, looking small and defeated. Young Kokoro, All Might began, his voice soft. He sat across from him, not as a towering symbol, but as a concerned mentor. I know things have been difficult. Kokoro looked up, his eyes immediately welling with tears. I keep messing everything up, All Might. I try to help, but I just get in the way. Sokka thinks I'm an idiot, and Kurata thinks I'm a coward. Maybe they're right. All Might's heart ached for him. This was the pure, compassionate core of his successor, drowning in self-doubt. No, he said firmly. They are not right. Your heart is not a liability. It is your compass. It is the entire reason you are a hero. Without it, power is just violence, and intellect is just cruelty. Never believe your empathy is a weakness. It is the most powerful thing you have. He leaned forward. But a compass is useless if you don't also read the map. You must learn to listen to Sokka's logic, even when it feels cold. You must learn to trust in Kurata's strength, even when it seems reckless. Your heart can unite them, young Kokoro. It can provide the why that gives their how and what meaning. Kokoro wiped his eyes, a tiny spark of his old determination flickering within him. He nodded slowly, taking in the words. Next, All Might met Sokka in the library. Sokka didn't even look up from his book when he approached. I have already processed the results of the drill, All Might, Sokka said, his tone dry. My strategy was 97% effective on a theoretical level. The failure was in the execution by the other two units. I have already begun formulating 1,374 revised behavioral models to account for their irrational tendencies. All Might pulled up a chair. And did any of those models account for the fact that you insulted them before the drill even began? Sokka finally looked up, his brow furrowed. My assessment of their capabilities was objective and factual. The truth is not an insult, to you perhaps, All Might countered gently. But you are part of a team now, young Sokka. A team of yourself. And a team is not a machine. It is a living thing. It runs on logic, yes, but it is fueled by trust and respect. Your mind is a brilliant, powerful weapon. But a weapon that cannot be wielded is just a useless piece of metal. You dismissed their strengths. You ignored their perspectives. A truly superior intellect does not just find the right answer. It finds a way to make others understand and follow it. He saw a flicker of something in Sokka's eyes, not understanding, perhaps, but the dawning realization of a new, unaccounted-for variable. The human element. Your counterparts are not just flawed components, All Might said. They are your other senses. You are trying to solve a puzzle with your eyes closed and your ears plugged. You need their input. You need Kokoro's intuition and Kurata's instincts to complete your data set. Sokka didn't reply. He just looked down at his notes, his face a mask of deep, complex thought. All Might had given him a problem he couldn't solve with an equation. Finally, he found Kurata in the gym, punching a heavy bag with rhythmic, thunderous impacts. All Might waited until he finished a flurry of blows, his chest heaving. Young Kurata, he said, his voice carrying over the squeak of the chain. Kurata stopped, turning his head. Sweat dripped from his chin. He didn't speak, just waited. I saw what you did in the drill, All Might said. You were fast. You were powerful. More powerful than I have ever seen young Midoriya be before. A flicker of pride in Kurata's eyes. But you were also blind, All Might continued, his tone becoming graver. You charged forward without looking at the consequences. You won the battle for a single dummy but brought a building down on 2 others. Power without control, without foresight, is just a natural disaster. It's a hurricane. It's an earthquake. It is not a hero. He walked closer. I know you feel frustrated. You feel held back by Sokka's thinking and Kokoro's hesitation. You just want to act. But that instinct, that drive, it must be aimed. Sokka is not trying to slow you down. He is trying to be your eyes, to see the whole battlefield for you. Kokoro is not trying to make you a coward. He is reminding you what you are fighting for. Kurata's fists were still clenched, but the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. He was listening. You are the sword, young Kurata, All Might said, his voice filled with a powerful conviction. You are the unstoppable force. But a sword is useless without an eye to guide it and a hand to give it purpose. Trust them. Let them be your guide. Let them aim your power. Together, you will be truly unstoppable. He placed a hand on Kurata's shoulder. The boy didn't flinch away. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing hard, the echoes of All Might's words reverberating through him along with the phantom impacts of his punches. All Might left them each with their thoughts. He had planted the seeds. He had spoken to the heart, the brain, and the body. But he knew, with a heavy certainty, that seeds could not grow without a trial. They needed more than just his words. They needed a reason to come together, a threat that would force them to see that their only path to victory was not in spite of each other, but because of each other. He just prayed that when that threat came, it wouldn't be the one that broke them for good. He had no idea that, in a dark room across the city, that very threat was being meticulously, brilliantly, and cruelly designed. The enemy was observing, and he had seen all the cracks in the foundation. The suspension from field training felt less like a punishment, and more like a state of limbo. Their days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of remedial classes, awkward silences, and Aizawa's increasingly frustrating teamwork exercises. He made them play trust falls, which resulted in Sokka calculating the optimal drop angle, while Kurata let him hit the mat out of sheer spite. He made them navigate a maze blindfolded, guided by each other's voices, an exercise that devolved into a screaming match within 2 minutes. He'd even, in a moment that felt like peak desperation, made them attempt to fold a king-sized fitted sheet together. The sheet ended up in a crumpled, Gordian knot on the floor, a perfect metaphor for their relationship. Every exercise designed to bring them together only seemed to drive them further apart, reinforcing their individual identities and their mutual disdain. Kokoro tried too hard to please everyone. Sokka treated every task as an intellectual puzzle to be solved by him alone, and Kurata met every challenge with brute force, whether it was appropriate or not. They were oil, water, and a lit match, and Aizawa was shaking the bottle. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, after a particularly disastrous exercise involving building a house of cards, which Kurata had solved by slamming his fist on the table, Aizawa reached his breaking point. His usual tired expression had curdled into one of profound, simmering frustration. He led the 3 of them back to the Heights Alliance common room. The rest of Class 1A, sensing the storm on the horizon, made themselves scarce. This isn't working, Aizawa stated, the words clipped and sharp. He gestured vaguely at the 3 of them. Everything I throw at you, you treat like a competition. You're not trying to cooperate. You're trying to prove that your way is the right way. You're still acting like 3 people. So, we're going to try something different. He pointed to a collection of large, flat-packed cardboard boxes leaning against the wall. They were from Sommer, a notoriously convoluted Swedish furniture company whose name was whispered with fear and reverence by college students and new homeowners across Japan. The logo was a cheerful, minimalist smiley face that seemed to mock the torment contained within its products. On top of the boxes was a single, thick instruction manual for what appeared to be an ALV-Kung entertainment center. The diagram on the box showed a monstrously complex shelving unit with multiple drawers, sliding glass doors, and integrated LED lighting. It looked less like furniture and more like a final boss from a puzzle game. This is your new exercise, Aizawa said, a glint of something almost cruel in his eyes. You will assemble this. All of you. Together. You will not leave this room until it is completed, and it must be completed exactly as shown in the instructions. No shortcuts. No modifications. No powers. He gave Kurata a pointed look. No punching things into place. Kokoro looked at the box with wide, anxious eyes. Sokka picked up the instruction manual, his brow furrowing as he flipped through the dense, wordless pages of pictograms. Kurata just stared at the pile of wood and screws as if it had personally offended him. Food and water are in the kitchen, Aizawa said as he walked towards the door. I suggest you figure it out. And then he was gone. The heavy door of the common room clicked shut behind him, and with a soft electronic beep, a red light appeared on the lock. He had actually, literally, locked them in. The three of them were alone with their Herculean task. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the drumming of the rain against the windows. It was a standoff. Predictably, Sokka was the first to break the silence. He dropped the instruction manual onto the coffee table with a thud. This is a rudimentary exercise in procedural logic and spatial reasoning. The optimal approach is a systematic one. I will serve as project manager, interpreting the schematics and delegating tasks. Kokoro, your fine motor skills are likely the most stable. You will be in charge of sorting and managing the hardware, screws, dowels, camlocks. Kurata, your physical strength will be utilized for the heavy lifting and assembly, but only under my direct and explicit instruction. Do not deviate. He delivered the speech with his usual air of unearned authority, as if he were a lead engineer addressing a team of clumsy interns. Kurata bristled immediately. I'm not your pack mule, Glasses. I'll do it my way. Your way resulted in the structural failure of a 5-story building, Sokka retorted without missing a beat. Your input into matters requiring precision is neither required nor desired. Why do you always have to be so mean? Kokoro asked, his voice small and hurt. He looked from Sokka's condescending face to Kurata's simmering anger. Aizawa-sensei wants us to work together. Like a team. A team requires a leader with a coherent vision, Sokka stated, tapping a finger on the instruction manual. I am providing that vision. The failure lies in the team's inability to follow it, and so, it began not with teamwork, but with the same fractured dysfunction that had defined their existence. Sokka laid out the first few steps of the plan. He had Kokoro meticulously sort the hundreds of screws, bolts, and mysterious plastic pieces into neat piles on a blanket. Kokoro, desperate to be useful, did so with painstaking care, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sokka then directed Kurata to attach the side panels to the baseboard using a set of camlocks. The first sign of trouble came immediately. Kurata, whose entire being was wired for explosive power, had all the finesse of a jackhammer. He tried to tighten a camlock with a screwdriver, and his grip was so strong he stripped the head of the screw completely, rendering it useless. Clumsy oaf! Sokka snapped, snatching the screwdriver from him. I said tighten, not pulverize. You've compromised the integrity of the joint. It's a stupid screw. Kurata roared back, his frustration boiling over. It's weak. Just let me punch it in. If you punch it, you will crack the particle board, and the entire structure will be unstable. Sokka's voice was rising to a shrill pitch. This requires delicacy, a concept that is clearly alien to you. I'll show you alien. They were nose to nose in an instant, Sokka's intellectual fury crashing against Kurata's physical rage. Kokoro rushed over, his hands fluttering nervously. Please stop. It's okay. Look, he said, rummaging through the pile of hardware. There's an extra one. See? We can just use the extra one. He held up a replacement camlock, his smile trembling but hopeful. The two of them backed off, still glaring at each other. They grudgingly allowed Kokoro to insert the new screw, and with Sokka giving condescending, minute-by-minute instructions, they managed to complete the first step. It had taken them 45 minutes to attach 2 pieces of wood. There were 97 steps left. The afternoon bled into a long, miserable evening. Their progress was painstakingly slow, every step a new battleground for their conflicting personalities. When it came time to install the back paneling, Kurata lost patience with the tiny, finicky nails and tried to force the panel into place, cracking one of the corners. Sokka responded with a 10-minute lecture on the tensile strength of composite wood that made Kurata look like he was about to physically vibrate out of his own skin. When they had to assemble the drawers, Kokoro, wanting everything to be perfect and aesthetically pleasing, spent 20 minutes trying to align the handles so they were perfectly level, a process Saku deemed a grossly inefficient use of time for a non-critical cosmetic element. They argued over everything. The interpretation of the pictograms. Obviously, that dotted line indicates a rotational insertion. No, it indicates an optional placement, you moron. The correct amount of wood glue to use. The best way to lift the heavy central shelf into place. Kurata, fueled by pure instinct and a desire for action, wanted to just lift it. Saku insisted on a complex plan involving leverage and counterweights using sofa cushions. Kokoro was worried someone would get a splinter. By the time the sun had set, casting long shadows across the common room, they were only on step 23. The room was a mess of cardboard, plastic wrapping, and half-assembled wooden components. The frame of the entertainment center stood crookedly in the middle of the floor, a monument to their failure. They had collapsed into their respective corners, defeated. Kurata was slumped on the sofa, glaring at the wooden monstrosity. Kokoro was sitting on the floor, quietly trying to bend a bent nail back into shape. Saku was staring at the instruction manual with such intensity he seemed to be trying to set it on fire with his mind. The animosity that had fueled them for hours had burned away, leaving behind only a thick, heavy layer of exhaustion. The silence was different now. It wasn't tense. It was just tired. "This is impossible," Kokoro whispered, finally breaking the quiet. He looked at the half-finished structure, his shoulders slumping. "We can't do it," Kurata grunted in agreement. "It's a stupid box. It's designed to be impossible." For the first time, Saku didn't offer a rebuttal. He just stared at the page he was stuck on, step 24. It was a complex diagram showing the installation of the sliding door mechanism, a nightmare of rollers, tracks, and brackets. He had gone over it a dozen times, and it didn't make sense. The diagram showed piece 7B connecting to bracket F9, but the pre-drilled holes on the main panel didn't align with the bracket. The instructions were wrong. His entire worldview was predicated on the idea that systems had rules. Instructions were to be followed. Logic was infallible. But the manual, the sacred text of this entire ordeal, was flawed. "The schematics are incorrect," Saku said, his voice flat. It was a stunning admission, like a devout priest admitting he'd found a typo in scripture. "Step 24 is physically impossible as illustrated. The pre-drilled holes for bracket F9 are misaligned by approximately 5 mm. Kurata and Kokoro looked at him. There was no triumph in their expressions, no "I told you so." They just saw his frustration, a frustration that finally mirrored their own. "So, we can't finish it?" Kokoro asked, his voice hopeful that this meant their ordeal was over. "No," Saku said, shaking his head. "The objective remains. We must adapt." He looked at the pieces, then at the diagram, his mind working furiously. The plan had failed. He needed a new one, but this time, he didn't have all the data. He looked at Kurata. "You noticed the back panel was flimsy. You said it felt weak. Describe the weakness." Kurata blinked, surprised at being asked for his input. I dunno. The corners. When I pushed on it, it bent here." He pointed to a spot on the half-assembled unit. "It felt like it wanted to crack." Saku's eyes narrowed. "The stress is concentrating on the corners because the central spine isn't properly supported. The instructions for the spine installation come after the back panel, but that's inefficient. It should be done first, to provide rigidity." He looked at the diagram again. "Your instinct was correct. Your method was just crude." It was the closest he had ever come to giving Kurata a compliment. Kurata just grunted, but he sat up a little straighter. Then, Saku turned to Kokoro. "You were concerned about the alignment of the drawer handles. A cosmetic issue. However," he paused, thinking, "your concern for aesthetics comes from a desire for harmony, for things to feel right. Look at this mechanism." He pointed to the confusing diagram for the sliding door. "It feels wrong, doesn't it? Logically, it should be smoother." Kokoro leaned in, studying the drawing. He didn't understand the mechanics, but he understood flow. "Well, yeah? It looks clunky, like this roller here." He pointed. "If it goes in that track, it looks like it would get stuck on this other part. It doesn't seem like it would slide smoothly. It feels jagged. He was describing a feeling, an intuition. But Sokka saw the mechanical truth behind it. Kokoro's feeling had identified the point of friction. The roller was supposed to go into a different track, one that wasn't clearly indicated in the drawing. The artist had made a mistake. The illustrator transposed tracks A and B. Sokka breathed, a slow smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a smile of arrogance, but one of genuine, electrifying discovery. Your intuition, it's a valid form of data analysis. It identified the anomaly my logic missed. A strange, unfamiliar energy began to fill the room. The thick fog of resentment was starting to burn away, replaced by the faint glow of a shared purpose. Okay, Sokka said, standing up. He looked different. The rigid posture was still there, but the condescending aura was gone, replaced by a focused intensity that was now aimed with them, not at them. New plan. We ignore the order of the manual. We build it in the way that makes structural sense. Kurata, we're going to reinforce the back panel with the central spine before we attach the sides. I need you to hold it in place. Steady. Don't force it. Kurata nodded, getting to his feet. Steady. Got it. Kokoro, I need you to be our quality control. If something feels wrong, if a step seems clunky or awkward, you speak up immediately. Don't hesitate. Your intuition is now a primary diagnostic tool. Kokoro's eyes widened, and he nodded, a real, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time all day. He wasn't just the screw sorter anymore. He had a vital role, and then, something amazing happened. They started to work. Sokka would call out a step, a modified version of the instructions. Okay, we need to attach the top panel. Kurata, I need you to lift it. But slowly. Kokoro, watch the dowel alignment. Tell us if it feels like it's grinding. Kurata would lift the heavy piece of wood with immense strength, but this time, it was a controlled, steady strength. He held it perfectly still, his muscles straining, his face a mask of concentration as he waited for the word. It's a little to the left, Kokoro would say, his hands hovering over the joint. It feels tight. A little more, there. That's it. It slid in. Okay, Kurata, lower it slowly, Sokka would command. Kokoro, get the camlocks ready. They moved through the remaining steps with a startling new efficiency. They were a three-man assembly line. Sokka was the architect, reading the flawed blueprints and translating them into a workable plan. Kokoro was the sensor, using his intuition to spot problems before they happened. Kurata was the engine, providing the raw, controlled power to execute their commands. There were still moments of friction. A slip screw, a misheard instruction. But the arguments that followed were different. They weren't attacks on each other. They were frantic, collaborative problem-solving sessions. It's not fitting! Kurata grunted, trying to slide a drawer into its slot. Wiggle it gently! The track might be tight, Kokoro suggested. The schematics indicate a 2 mm tolerance. It should fit, Sokka insisted, leaning in to look. Wait. Your grip is too tight, Kurata. You're torquing the drawer frame slightly, changing its shape. Relax your hand. Kurata took a breath, consciously eased his grip, and the drawers slid into place with a satisfying swoosh. They didn't even notice the passage of time. They were in a flow state, a bubble of pure, focused collaboration. They were communicating, not just with words, but with nods, gestures, and a shared understanding that had been forged in the crucible of their mutual frustration. Finally, just as the first hints of dawn were painting the sky outside, they performed the last step, plugging in the LED lights. Sokka inserted the plug into the wall socket, and the entire entertainment center lit up with a soft, ethereal blue glow. It was finished. And it was perfect. The drawers slid smoothly. The glass doors were perfectly aligned. It stood there, solid and immaculate, in the center of the debris-strewn common room. A testament not to the quality of Swedish engineering, but to their own impossible, newfound synergy. They stood back, side by side, and looked at their creation. They were covered in sawdust, their muscles ached, their minds were fuzzy with lack of sleep, but they weren't looking at each other with animosity. Kurata looked at Sokka, not as a condescending weakling, but as the guy whose brain had untangled the mess. He looked at Kokoro, not as a crybaby, but as the one whose weird feelings had saved them from drilling a dozen holes in the wrong place. Sokka looked at his counterparts, not as an oaf and a liability, but as essential components. One provided the raw data of instinct, the other, the processing power of intuition. His logic was incomplete without them. Kokoro looked at them both and felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the LED lights. He saw the fierce strength and the sharp mind not as things that scared him, but as things that protected him. For the first time, he felt like they were on the same side. A grudging, exhausted respect settled between them. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't absolution. But it was a truce. A recognition that, for one brief, shining moment, they hadn't been three broken pieces. They had been one builder. Kurata broke the silence. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say good job. He just looked at Sokka and Kokoro and grunted. I'm hungry. Sokka gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. A logical biological response to prolonged exertion. Kokoro laughed, a real, genuine laugh. I'll make some eggs. As Kokoro headed to the kitchen and Kurata raided the fridge for juice, Sokka remained for a moment, looking at the finished entertainment center. He reached out and ran a hand over the smooth, finished wood. It was solid. It was stable. It was whole, and for the first time, the possibility that they could be, two, didn't seem quite so illogical.